Good morning and good afternoon. Welcome to Cloud GTM XP, session 2 of day 2. My name is Sanjay Mehta. I'm the Chief Cloud Officer at Tackle. That's a fancy title that says I stick my hands in a lot of places, mostly in and around our cloud partnerships. And a huge shout out to AWS, Microsoft, and Google that are all sponsors of our event. I'm running a really cool panel today. I have a lawyer, leading ISV, and one of the early pioneers in software marketplaces. And we're going to talk about everything that you don't automatically think of when you start your journey around cloud go-to-market and teaming up with the clouds, which is what happens in my back office. We talk to a lot of alliances folks and partnerships folks and business development folks that know exactly what they want to do, why they want to do it, how it's going to scale their partnership and scale their business. But sometimes they forget that it might just break, in a good way, everything the organization has traditionally done and everything the people in your organization have traditionally known around finance and procurement and legal and order management and operations and everything else. So we're going to talk about all the stuff that happens behind the scenes and how to make sure it happens better as you take your journey forward. So with that, I would love to just hand it off real quick to our three panelists for some brief intros. Dave, why don't we start with you?
Sure. Good morning, Dave McCann, and pleasure to be here, Sanjay. Thanks for the invite. Spent about 7 years building out AWS Marketplace from 2014 to 2021, and now out of AWS, semi-retired, and sitting on boards and doing some consulting.
Awesome. Thanks for being here. Always good to have an old friend in the room. Kevin, new friend. Intro from you, please.
Yeah, my name's Kevin Kriebel. I'm the VP of Business Development Partnerships at Drata. I actually got thrust into the whole cloud service provider marketplace scene because of Dave McCann. Met Dave on a flight. I can't remember if it was to Reinforce or reInvent a number of years back, and just happened to meet him on the plane and got connected from there. So I've been at Drata for just over a year, but came through Palo Alto Networks through acquisition, experienced Thousand Eyes and Okta previously.
What airline was that? Do you remember? You might owe them a little more.
Dave, do you remember? I think I usually fly Delta, I'm guessing, or it might have been maybe it was going to Chicago. I don't remember.
No, I would have been sitting on an Alaska if I could be on an Alaska. I'd be on an Alaska. And
Okay.
if I can't be on an Alaska, I'd probably be on a Delta or an American.
Yeah, I'd probably one of those three.
Well, if you cover them all, we're likely to hit it at some point. So. And last but not least, Melissa.
Hi, I'm Melissa Maxwell. I am the VP and General Counsel here at Tackle. I've been at Tackle for about 4 years, figuring out all of the cloud and go-to-market. I've been a commercial transaction attorney for a number of years before this. So excited to be here.
Perfect. Thanks everybody for joining. So we'll do a little around the horn. I got some questions, and then I thought we'd have a little fun with a little lightning round, like some quick tips there at the end on super actionable things people might be able to go and do right after this session, or maybe by next Monday. So Dave, we'll start with you. I think I met you in like 2013 or so. I think it was. We had a nice lunch back in the days where AWS didn't pay for anything. So I think I probably paid for the lunch. Things have changed a lot over the years. Back then, it was really all about, like, what is this marketplace thing? I feel like I need to be a part of it. I want to get my placard up to say that I'm a cloud savvy organization. I'm a SaaS organization. And now it's really all about real revenue, real cloud partnership, driving sales efficiency. And when we chat a lot. We've talked a lot about this new paradigm and how cloud go-to-market might just be the best way to scale revenue and to accelerate revenue and to do it efficiently. So I'd love your perspective on, like, what's the journey been like over the last 5 or 6 years? What's changed? And what do you think the driving forces are?
Wow, that's a long open question. You know, a lot's changed from 2014. It was 2014, by the way, just to jog your memory. And so 2014 to now, 9 years in cloud marketplaces. Back in 2014, AWS Marketplace was the first out the door prior to my arriving. And back then, if you think about it, everything was not SaaS. It was mostly AMI. It was a server package. Most software was server-based. And I'd run a couple of software companies before joining Amazon, where Amazon would cold call me and say, run my software on the cloud. And, back in 2007 through 2014, AWS didn't have enough functionality that I would have dared move my code onto AWS. Right. What changed, I think, first of all, was AWS laid out enough of a stack that as a software vendor, you could actually put your software up on the cloud and dare to run it. That was the first thing that changed. And that involved a lot of networking innovation and resilience. And then for the ISV, once I was running Marketplace, Sanjay, and talking to you when you were in your trend persona, every ISV had to re-engineer onto the cloud. And that was a lot of re-engineering, and ISVs had spent a lot of time making tough decisions about whether to take the risk. Was it worth it? Did they do it with a server? What happened when they needed multiple servers, and how did you string multiple servers together? And then SaaS, AWS Marketplace is the first marketplace to handle SaaS, and that didn't really happen until 17 and 18. And so really marketplaces, and then of course you have Kubernetes and containers. And so if you kind of take SaaS and then duration of contract, so there was a bunch of innovation that the marketplace teams had to do. Azure followed behind, Google came along behind that. Every marketplace vendor had to put enough capability into the ISV to take the risk. That kind of has all changed, where now I think the marketplaces in general have got sufficient capability that as an engineering leader, you can put your product on the cloud. And that pivoted from the will it actually run there and can it be deployed to how do I now sell it? So the shift now is how do you sell effectively in the marketplace? And so the attention is much more on the lead sharing, the contracting, the deployment, the revenue recognition, which affects the back office. The first 5 years of cloud were all about getting engineering to believe. Now I think it's actually all about changing the behavioral patterns of the contracting arm of a company, not the engineering arm. That's the big macro. And then, now you get into 2023 and, software companies around the world are having to adapt to 4 or 5 big trends, which, maybe we will get into in a minute.
Perfect. Love that. Melissa, you've got a unique lens, and full disclosure, Melissa is the general counsel here at Tackle. So I love working with her. She starts with yes or under what conditions, as opposed to no, that's too risky, which is always great. But you represent a unique perspective. One, you help tackle with our customers and our agreements and privacy agreements and everything else. But you're also a buyer of software. And I know you're a big fan of buying through Marketplace. So what's driving the change in your thinking, and how can we get more and more lawyers to think like you think?
Thanks, Sanjay. Well, I think I was very fortunate to be in a unique position at Tackle, where all of the back office kind of processes that we worked through were built with the cloud go-to-market top of mind. We were in the early stages of the startup life, so we were focused a lot on how can we do more with less, which is not really unlike kind of today's environment, where the procurement and legal teams are trying to figure out ways to spend less, do more, and do it faster. So kind of a spoiler alert, but the cloud go-to-market, if done right, really is the solution here, because I'm excited to see more folks recognize and realize that a lot of our business processes were built for a different time. So if you think about it, it wasn't that long ago where large enterprises were resistant to things like e-signature. It's silly to think about it right now, but there was a time where something as simple as signing a contract was physically printed and then routed by assistants, running around with that infamous red folder for signing. Those days are gone. So the point of Marketplace isn't really to add another layer on top of that. It's the legal teams, I think, really need to understand that you don't go through that regular traditional process just to turn around and do it all again through the Marketplace. So that's totally a waste of time. Imagine a world where a consumer was to go online and you want to buy something. Before you click pay now, you're told you have to go sign a contract and go outside of the marketplace, and before you can, finish the transaction. That is silly to think about as a consumer. The reason B2C works is because of standardization. So just to kind of think about this a little bit, legal teams aren't flexing value by redlining contracts. So the marketplaces I want to talk about the standard contracts, because the more we leverage these standard contracts, the faster and easier and better that marketplace experience can be for both buyers and sellers. So each marketplace has its own kind of standard contract that can be used. It's longer than I typically like, but it's obviously built to be a product agnostic. The lawyers at these marketplace companies have spent a lot of time trying to make it fair for both buyers and sellers. So I guess my advice to all of the people listening is, tell your lawyers to use this. Like, it really will save time. It might not be your standard process, but you can change your process. It might not be exactly what you want, but there are some trade-offs. Like, I promise during the revision team, those marketplace legal teams really do listen to the buyers and sellers lawyers in collecting the feedback. So the bottom line, I guess, it means that when we sell through the marketplace as Tackle, we just have an order form that references the marketplace standard contract. It's point and click easy. With high volume, my team doesn't have to review every contract. There's no redlining. I know I will get shunned by some lawyers out there, but sometimes you just have to trust that there's safety in numbers. We do this all of the time with other SaaS applications, where you have to weigh the risks with knowing that you're not going to be the only one negatively impacted, and the vendor is not going to upset their entire customer base. So I think legal teams are slowly but surely starting to think about all of the other areas where they can save money and spend their time on bringing actual value to their customers. So on the buying side, you mentioned that I love buying through the marketplace when an ISV is using that standard contract, because it's a much faster procurement process for us. And really eliminates a lot of the legal review, because my team knows that contract. We don't have to read it all the time, line by line. So I could talk, I guess, all day about how I've structured my team and workflows to facilitate faster and leaner processes with leveraging the cloud go-to-market. So totally happy to answer any additional questions. Feel free to reach out. Anybody that wants their teams to really learn about the marketplace, love talking about it. I don't know if I answered your question, though.
I love a big, robust answer, since the chat is accusing me of asking complex questions. But like, these guys can handle complex questions. Like, they have complex answers. But
I'm a lawyer. I could talk all day.
I remember in the early days, almost a decade ago, where this idea of standard contracts and enterprise contracts came out, and I think my initial reaction was, that's crazy. Like, you're never going to get a group of lawyers and buyers and sellers to agree on a standard set of terms, even though we all fight about the same 3 or 4 things: limitation liability, infringement, warranty, same stuff. And it's amazing to see the power of it working today. And I think the point you hit on, like, embrace this new reality, embrace the strength in numbers, and actually speed up your sales cycles. Like, I've not met a CRO or a CFO that doesn't want to cut a month or 2 off their sales cycle, particularly in 3-month quarters. So
can I make a comment there, Sanjay? Because I think it was interesting, the comment about, tell your GC to use standard contract. I think you look at that on 2 sides. First of all, it was a visionary CEO who came up with the idea. So if you actually want to know where standard contract came from, the father of standard contract was the CEO of Snowflake, Bob Muglia. And in a meeting I had with Bob Muglia, where we were discussing friction in marketplaces, Bob was the one that honed in and said, AWS, you need to solve the contract friction. And that's what engendered what became a first contract, and then we morphed it to standard contract. So even in ISVs, I will tell you that the GC's job is to protect risk, and the CRO's job is to get revenue. So it's not always the case in an ISV that the CRO can tell the GC what to do. It's the CEO who has to decide risk. And so the CEO actually has to sometimes instruct the GC to even consider standard contract. And not all GCs are open to that. So there is some cultural persuasion that has to be done with the GC, either by the CFO or the CEO. And I don't think that we should assume that that happens in all cultures. You know, culture is set by the CEO, and risk culture, I think, is mostly set by the CFO and then the GC. So, you know, I think it's ISV specific. If you go over to the enterprise buyer, even today, 2023, I will tell you, procurement departments are not all aware of standard contract. And there are procurement departments who think their job is negotiating unique terms. So on the buyer side, there is still persuasion to be done. And I think today's 2023 economic recession, the pressure on headcount, the pressure for velocity with headcount is causing people to reconsider the simplicity of standard contracts. But in a large enterprise, particularly the Fortune 500, I don't think procurement departments are all there yet. They're getting there, but they're not all there.
Yeah, no, it's a great point, and it's a great shout out for why you want to co-sell. Because I spent 20 years in security, and when you're selling to a CISO, if you're lucky, probably a VP or a director of security, that person doesn't know about standard contract. They don't know about cloud commitments. They don't know where to find them. So co-sell is key. Kevin, nobody's doing this better than you, buddy. Like, if I had a nickel for every ISV that said I want to be the next Strata, I'd have a lot of nickels. Your growth has been pretty rocket ship like around cloud go-to-market and co-selling in marketplaces. I imagine, like a lot of ISVs, that started on the shoulders of a guy like you in partnerships, and it only scales when you get a lot of other people to buy in. So I'd love you to share the inner secrets of how do you convince the rest of the C-suite to not only come along for the ride, but maybe help fuel the ride. You're muted, buddy. Let's see if you can manage to pop through, or we'll ad-lib it a little bit. Maybe hit facing problems bottom right, and while you're doing that and trying to find your audio, find your voice, shall we say. It's important to amplify your success.
Can you hear me now?
There you got it, buddy. Here you go.
Okay, it like randomly connects to my iPhone. I don't know why it does that. Anyways, apologies. Yeah, it's very strange. So, I mean, here at Drata, right, our core customer, like the customer we've sold to historically, we've only been on the market for about just over 2 years, has been venture-backed startups. There's no company in the world that works with more venture-backed startups than AWS, right? So for us, it was pretty easy, very quickly getting aligned with like, where are most of our customers today, right? If you think about like from a tech alliance perspective, or like when you do ISV partnerships, you want to be working with other companies that have something complementary to the offering that you have and are selling to the same customer that you are, right? Nobody fits that mold better than AWS. And so for us, that was an easy sell with not only the exec team, but the board level, right? And that's where it starts. I think from there, once you have actual leadership buy-in, it's about getting the sales team rolling, right? So I think that's the biggest thing that I see missing at a lot of companies. I can tell you early days at Expanse, I was trying to get the sales team bought in. But if the sellers aren't selling through Marketplace, if they're not collaborating with their AWS counterparts, none of this is going to matter. You can throw all the money, marketing, ammo, legal stuff you want at it. It won't matter. So for us at Drata, we do things like, comp neutral with the AWS sellers, so that our team isn't taking a hit on like a 7% fee or whatever it is. We're investing in the future of that partnership. And what's happened very quickly, in literally only 9 months since getting spun up, thanks to Tackle, is we're getting 50 to 60 leads a month on average from AWS sellers, right? And so that's net new, right? We're taking business to them, but we're getting as much business back. And so we've put in automation and all sorts of things to automate the experience and interaction between the AWS seller and the Drata seller. So again, I think that's like, if you don't do anything else, do that. That's the number one thing that you can be doing. The more visibility you have between you and your partner, in this case, AWS or Microsoft or Google, the more trust. And I think the challenge is a lot of these companies that they're kind of going half in and half out, right? And they know that, right? Any partner you're working with, they know that. And so we've done that here at Drata, where I think if you talk to anybody at most of these cloud providers and you say the term compliance, the first thing they're going to say to you is Drata.
That's awesome. How did you, so you talked about comp neutral. I always wonder about comp neutral versus comp positive. I'm a big fan of comp positive. If you can do it, I think behavior change is hard. And it's when I talk to digital native companies, they're like, we're born in the cloud, we're digitally native. I'm like, your 47-year-old salesperson is not. They've sold the same way for a long time. So you need to bring them along for the journey. And your back office people are not. So I'm curious on beyond comp neutral, like what were the big motivators to actually get the sales force to lean in?
I mean, the fact of getting the leads back, right? Like that's massive. They're getting net new leads that they weren't getting otherwise. Having another person sell, like our whole thing is don't lose alone and don't win alone, right? If you're having the AWS seller involved, like at Drata, we sell Drata, right? AWS rep, they have purview over way more than just Drata. So when the customer's coming to us, they're like, hey, help me with compliance. That's great. When they're talking to the AWS seller, they're like, I have these 10 problems. How do I solve those, right? So the relationship, it's night and day. We can't compete with the relationship that a cloud marketplace seller has versus what we have. And so I think that's the unique position as well. We've seen a lot of folks on the AWS side help drive opportunities for us, right? There's deals that have gone stale that we can't get them on the horn, and the AWS person is meeting with them today, right, and getting them back on for us. So a lot of that is it's selling through your ecosystem. That's kind of the old school way. It's how do you sell with your ecosystem, right? Like the partner doesn't want to just be the marketplace transaction at the end. The AWS rep wants to be involved and provide value, and they can, but they can't if you don't provide them visibility. And I think that's the core here. Like there's a difference. Selling through your channel and selling with your channel are two very different things that get confused.
Yeah, so that's great on how do you motivate the sales folks. The other thing you talked about, like the quota carrying, bag carrying salespeople on the team. The other thing you talked about was listing fees. And when you start your marketplace journey and you're doing whatever, 0.5% of revenue, 1% of revenue, like the reality is not a lot of people care yet, particularly if you're in a big company. But when it's starting to produce 5% of revenue, 10% of revenue, you get a lot of interesting comments from people like CROs and CFOs. And one of those things is around listing fees and the treatment of listing fees. And I frequently get asked, like, why would I pay a 3% fee or a 5% fee or 7% fee to transact this way? And I know the answer I give, but I'm super curious how each of you might answer that question.
Yeah, there's a number of ways. One, at the end of the day, it is a transaction fee, right? I think we need to be realistic about that versus like we're not giving Amazon margin. There's a transaction fee. It can be accounted as such. You're talking about a long-term investment. Anybody on this call who's running channel or partnerships at the organization that they work at, like, you know what that's like getting started from scratch, right? Starting from the ground up. And again, this goes back, if you have a leadership team that's like, hey, we're all about short-term wins and we don't care about the long-term, you're probably in the wrong place. You're probably in a plot where you're not going to be successful. So from a standpoint of that, of saying like, if I'm an AWS buyer, right, and I buy Drata through Marketplace, Drata is now tied, my Drata bill is now tied to my infrastructure bill. If I sell direct to a customer, their bill is between us and them. Now I have AWS involved as well. If they don't pay their AWS bill, which has Drata attached to it, infrastructure goes night-night, right? And I think that's the other thing to keep in mind here is like, how do you make it harder for a customer to get out of a contract? Right, because especially now, and I total empathy for companies that are going through it right now, and not to say that Drata just holds firm. Obviously, there's situations where a company's struggling, and we obviously have made that work with them. But there's a lot of companies that just sign up for stuff and don't, they try to walk away and like, well, they probably won't send me any collections. They probably won't press action. With Amazon, we have another partner in the fight with us now. Again, it's like for the seller, don't sell alone. For us as a company, don't go to market alone, right? We want to, and AWS creates a really strong tie when you're tying that Drata invoice to the infrastructure invoice.
Sweet. Yeah, I talk a lot about simplification of procurement, vendor onboarding, legal cycles. Like,
Oh, totally.
I get a CFO who's not
So,
willing to a sales cycle
yeah.
for 50%.
Well, let me make a comment on listing fees. I think a different conversation does go on at the CEO level. I think what goes on at a board level, and I've sat on, I sit on boards, I'm on a few boards, and I run 4 companies. I think the macro discussion that should be had, which does get had, I think, with large software companies and emerging software companies that are seriously looking at supply chain of software, is that sales and marketing is the number one cost on an ISV. And at the board level with your investor, when you're on the scaling of your business, or if you're profitable and you're public, sales and marketing as a percentage of your P&L is a board level CEO strategic topic.
Yep.
I think you need to be thinking about, once you pivot to using digital supply chain through a marketplace, your total spend, which includes the fee from the marketplace channel, has to be weighed up to your total capture of business cost. And particularly today in the 2023 economy, where, let's be clear, ISVs are laying people off. Every ISV that I'm consulting with right now is trimming headcount. And they're scanning for sales efficiency, marketing cost cuts, and time to contract. And marketplaces have so many values to deliver that I think listing fees are the wrong conversation. Your total cost of sales and marketing needs to be coming down on your P&L in a soft economy. And what's happening in the 2023 economy is a lot of companies missed their Q1 number. They're having an April board meeting. They're now reforecasting Q2, Q3, and Q4. They're taking out people. They've actually got to go get more revenue with less people. And the marketplace offer, actually in a soft economy and a digital economy post-COVID where people are working from home, actually is a compelling reason to use the marketplace more. Why? Number one, most customers are trying to meet their EDP commitments, their PPAs with AWS. And there are billions of PPA commitments. And if you're the CFO of an enterprise and the CIO looking at your performance to contract, I know big companies right now that are saying, we want to put more software through the marketplace to make the commitment on the PPA. Secondly, the listing fee relative to the total cost of sales and marketing is a small number. And really, you need to be macroeconomically saying, can we actually drive more through the partnering on a marketplace by spending less in our sales and marketing spend? And so I think listing fees, seen by a strategic CEO who understands their total sales and marketing on the P&L, and a CFO that is empathetic, with a CRO that is credible, those are the 4 people that drive strategy. The engineering person is going to do what's necessary. But the CRO, the CFO, and the CEO need to see, the conversation needs to be, how do we trim sales and marketing as a total expense? And the marketplace actually is a way. You listen to George Kurtz at CrowdStrike, and George has publicly talked about taking a quarter off time to contract and renewals and other capabilities. So I think listing fees are yesterday's topic. And today, in 2023, it's about sales and marketing efficiency.
Yeah,
that's what I'm discussing with clients.
No, Dave, I completely agree with you. And I'm not a CEO, so I'll say the non-political answer here. If you're a software company with legit margins and you're worried about a 10% or 8% or whatever it is on new business, depending on your relationship with CSP X, Y, or Z, or 3% on renewal, it's too late for you. It's too late. If that's what's going to break the back of your company is a 3% transaction fee at AWS, then you're going to miss out on the entire channel that AWS represents because of that. You've got bigger problems than a transaction fee. So I'll leave it
I think you forgot yet, Kevin. I'm not a CEO yet, is what you meant to say.
Yeah, we'll see about that. If I keep making answers like that, I'm probably going to get ousted before I get started. But yeah.
Dave picked the right background there with gold. He's dropping golden tips today. But I think it's pivoting that conversation into the C-suite and talking about it from that lens is important. And Kevin, in your earlier answer, you hit on the other piece of the equation, which is top of funnel. And if you can go to your CRO and say, I got 60 top of funnel leads coming into my pipeline from my cloud provider partnership every month. And PS, those are likely the best leads you got in your company, right? With all due respect to marketing, marketing's going to broad-based. These are warm leads. Somebody's talked to somebody, somebody's on a journey. Like those are awesome. And if you're smart, you team those up with your marketing team to really nurture those leads. I think you got a great recipe for success. And I love the change in the conversation, and I kind of just got motivated that we should write a blog about it together, but help everybody else spread the good news. Dave, the other thing I wonder about, like for a long time, marketplace has been a really direct motion, and more recently, it's become a pretty channel-heavy motion. And particularly, I always say, if you're going to transition a B2B software market that's $755 billion to embrace digital selling, cloud co-selling, and marketplace-based selling, you need some really big traditional vendors to come along for the ride. You need the Ciscos and the VMwares and the Dells and the whoever's. And they sell through channel, and they sell through lots of them, and they do it all over the world. So I've always considered you a bit of a futurist around cloud go-to-market and cloud selling. So whether it's channel or maybe other elements that we, the audience, haven't thought of, if you had a crystal ball and you were still at the helm of a marketplace business, what do you think lies ahead?
Wow. Good question.
That was only one question, by the way. That was not three.
No, it was a multifactorial single question. What lies ahead on marketplaces? Clearly I'm not at AWS anymore, so I don't have the wealth of data to inform the pattern. Look, everybody engineers the possible and then they test things. But if you think about it at a macro level, and dialogue I'm having with a few people, right now, technologically, everybody's raving about large language models, generative ML. ChatGPT is a single expression of generative ML, not the only one around. AWS just launched Bedrock. How is ML going to impact the continued shift of supply chain to some form of digital transformation? And marketplaces are a component of digital supply chain. They're not the only game in town. So if you look over the next 3 to 5 years, here's where I think there's ripe opportunity for Tackle, for the marketplaces, for the procurement vendors like Ariba and Coupa, for the spend management vendors that look at analyzing spend, like an Apptio. The supply of software is an advisory business. It's a knowledge transfer business. It's a persuasion business between the selling team, which could be a channel partner like a CDW, a Presidio, an Optiv, a Computer Center in Europe, a Software One. It's an advisory business to a set of technical and economic buyers who are exchanging knowledge on a problem that wants to be solved. And it's a multi-person, multi-month, in the larger contract space, point-click buy doesn't happen overnight. Even when point-click subscribe, provision, bill through marketplaces occur, it's after a lot of advice. And think of all the meetings in the sales cycle over 9 months for $1 million contract. So I think the most radical thing that I think is going to happen that I've been contemplating is how generative ML going to augment the human. The human's not going to be replaced. I don't buy the ML replaces humans tomorrow morning. ML is going to augment the human. So in every touch of your supply chain, as I construct an advisory dialogue, I'm the solution architect on Enterprise Y at AWS. I hear that ISV Z and ISV N are talking to my enterprise, and their solution architects are engaged. And the buying team at the enterprise is talking to their integrator, their reseller, AWS, and the ISV. They're taking input from 4 people. They've got some RFP doc, and eventually they get to a decision. All of that is going to be touched by ML. So now you have to take every one of those engagement points and say, advice is rendered either verbally or in written text. So how is ML going to accelerate and change that content and present that content. I submit questions to ChatGPT every day, and it blows me away with the quality of the answer I get. And it's outdated because it will tell you, I'm sorry, my last language set that I got from ChatGPT was September of 21, my training cohort. So it's not current for today, right? So North Carolina passed a law this morning. ChatGPT can't comment on it. ChatGPT says, I don't scan the internet. But some language models and ML models are going to get applied by clever people, possibly like you, right? And they're going to augment the human selling process. I think that's going to disrupt it. Now, all the cloud vendors will try and do it. The ISVs will try and do it. Salesforce will probably have a role, right? But so will Tackle. And if we fast forward the clock 3 years and everybody's doing quarterly or frequent releases of capability, I can envision a time when half of the selling cycle is augmented by ML. And system will talk to system, person will talk to person, but there'll be less people. And if I'm forecasting my sales and marketing costs 3 years out as a $500 million software vendor, I'm hoping my sales and marketing costs are coming down, and the large language models and generative ML is going to do it much more in an automated model. I think that is the most disruptive thing. And frankly, on the reseller side and the channel side, they're going to be leaner. They're going to be managed service providers with less people and more automation. It's just coming. I know that's where I think the next 3 years are. That's where I would be engineering. If I was running a startup right now, I'd be looking at transforming the supply chain by using and training a large language model to attack the most inefficient, engaging, closing, and deploying experiences to automate.
There you go. So when Kevin starts a startup as a CEO, you can be the advisor and we can do all this stuff. It'll be great. So let's, we got a few minutes left. Let's do a little lightning round and pick on the personas in the back office and what we would tell them. So I'm the senior manager of the Microsoft Alliance at some startup, and I'm walking into the office and I bump into the CEO in the elevator. What do I tell the CEO?
I'll let Kevin answer that.
What do I tell the CEO why it's important? I mean, again, Microsoft is, I mean, arguably Microsoft itself is arguably the largest channel partner in the world, right? So if you're talking about, go-to-market reach, you're going to not invest in the largest channel ecosystem globally. I don't know. That seems pretty silly to me, right? So again, I think there's like education here. Like just because a person started a company doesn't necessarily make them the greatest go-to-market leader at the company or necessarily have that intel prior to founding the company. So a lot of this is education. So if I'm that person, a lot of what I'm doing in the early days is educating.
Perfect. We hit on this one.
If you're saying if you're the alliance manager at an ISV.
Yeah.
If I was an alliance manager at an ISV and I know that 85% of SaaS vendors don't run on Microsoft, I'd be focusing on my AWS partnership. And
well, it depends on who your customer is, right? I mean, it depends on who your customer.
Sure, but if I'm an ISV and I'm running an AWS, first of all, most ISVs build on AWS first, not Azure. So I've already engineered on AWS. And so the big question as an ISV is, am I going to go port to Azure as well? And then the question is, in the current supply chain world, how many ISVs are told by their enterprise buyer, I'll only buy it through the Azure marketplace? And my data says very few.
So
I don't think that's a real use case.
My data says buyers are going to buy everything they want from wherever they want.
Yeah, agreed.
All the buyers are going to have multiple commitments.
Buyers are actually going to buy. Buyers are going to buy in the best way that helps their enterprise capture the contract at best terms and automate the provisioning the way engineering wants. So the engineering owner who consumes the software, how it gets consumed and deployed and integrated into identity, security, and network is actually the first thing you have to overcome. And given that AWS's cloud footprint is larger than the other two, most integration is now Azure AD. Absolutely, every ISV has to plug into Azure AD. That's a must. But Okta can solve that for you, and so most people use Okta. So I think you need to think about operating the way the buyer wants you to go.
I love that if there's a common pattern in ISVs I talk to, they like highly opinionated people who just tell them what to do. So I love it. It's like, you got a problem here, use Okta. Okta is a great customer, so a nice free plug for our relationship there. We're running out of time. Maybe the last parting words from each of you, piece of advice for ISVs, whether they're just getting started or they're a little further down the path. Like, what's the one thing you would really hard examine with the C-suite next week? Melissa, we'll start with you.
Perfect. So kind of touching back on some of the things Dave said is, I think it's important to recognize that your lawyer and your legal team, they're there to advocate for what's in the best interest of the company, of their client, the organization. They're not there to tell you what to do on risk. They advise on the risk. So they need to kind of step it up. I mean, they're not there to be the dream crushers, and procurement shouldn't be doing that either. So I guess my parting words are, look at your teams and change your workflow processes, not just in legal, but procurement and across the system. It has to support the reality of today's business. And sometimes it might be taking a little bit more risk, but the attorney's job is to support the business and advise on the risk. So really make sure that your teams in procurement and legal are really being an enabler of knowing the ins and outs of the cloud go-to-market, and not just being that dream crusher, because at the end of the day, that's not advocating for your client's best interest.
I love it. All right, we have 15 seconds. Kevin, bring us home.
Just get leadership aligned and get the sales team acting. Sales team's not acting, nothing else you do is going to matter.
Cool. Awesome. Dave, Kevin, Melissa, thanks for joining us. Really appreciate the insights today. Lots of good stuff.
Thank you for the opportunity.
Yeah, thank you. Cheers.
Yeah, thank you. Bye.